Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be reviewing the new series of Doctor Who, the first with Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor, and the first with Chris Chibnall as showrunner. We'll then be asking, how much do production values matter? But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, the self-serving answer to that would be my new comic, The Little Deaths of Watson Tower, which is written by me and drawn by the excellent Rosie Alexander, and is a standalone short story about a group of kids who get turned into tiny Grim Reapers and are forced to confront both literal and figurative death. Available now from nickbryan.com.
I've seen the art and it does look very, very beautiful. I'd recommend people picking it up.
I can actually, brag about this a bit because it's not completely self-serving for me to say, but Rosie did do an amazing job of drawing it. Anyway, yeah, I will mostly talk about this in the final segment towards the end, but I normally plug my stuff. But since we have put quite a lot of work into it, it's been in the works for quite a long time, and I think when this episode comes out, you might just about have time to order it for Halloween. So I thought I'd slip the plug in now. The Little Deaths of Watson Tower, available from nickbryan.com, or if you go to nickbryan.com/littledeaths, there's a, buy landing page thing. Or if you just go to my Twitter profile, I'm pretty sure the pinned tweets will still be, please buy The Little Deaths of Watson Tower. Anyway, we're not actually here to talk about my creative works. We're actually here to talk about those of other people, and the other people creative work I have been watching lately is the third season of iZombie, the ongoing procedural supernatural crossover series from the CW, and I think it's on Netflix in the UK. In fact, I know it is because that's why I'm watching it. And this is a show about a woman who becomes a zombie after getting attacked at a boat party, as they do in America. And when she discovers that when she eats a brain, she then gets visions of the life of the owner of that brain, she decides to put this superpower to use. The one way they put these superpowers to use on American telly: solving crime. I think we may have discussed iZombie before, possibly, maybe at least very briefly in one of these "What Else Have You Been Doing" segments. But yeah, I just got back to it after quite a long gap and started season 3, and it's kind of interesting. They seem to be leveraging the sort of wider world, wider subplots zombie thing playing an increasingly large role in the society. It's becoming increasingly hard to keep it secret in quite an interesting way, to an extent that, to be honest, the crime storylines, the sort of procedural Liv helps her police partner solve a crime stuff, is starting to feel increasingly kind of, we also have to do that, don't we? Here's 4 scenes in an episode with a really, really skeletal whodunit story while we do the zombie subplot stuff we actually care about. Which, I don't know, I do wonder if they'll occasionally have to drop or reconfigure that stuff entirely, but I am still quite enjoying the show as it stands.
Yeah, I've seen this show as well, but only up into the second series, so I think you're ahead of me. And I always find it interesting how they balance the episodic nature of what is in essence a procedural show like CSI and the arc plot element, because I think procedural shows seem to really have gone out of fashion since their height in, well, they were dominant, I guess, 60s to, until relatively recently. There's, every show from X-Files, Buffy, CSI have got a strong procedural element to them. And the fact that they decided to go for this in the modern sort of age when there's been a huge focus on arc plot actually makes the show somewhat sort of different and in some ways slightly quaintly old-fashioned. But then again, it does have obviously quite a lot of arc plot as well because it is a modern show.
Yeah, I mean, obviously procedural stuff is kind of a relic for when showrunners could not at all guarantee that people would see multiple consecutive episodes of their show or sit down and watch the whole thing or have any way to access old episodes if they happened to be out when they were on. So every episode had to be pretty standalone, and you could maybe get away with a couple of tiny ticks of ongoing storyline, but you couldn't write these sort of novelistic chapter by chapter things, whereas now basically every show does that.
Yeah.
And to an extent, but obviously, as we've moaned before, the price of the novelistic premium telly model is that every show now only feels they need one storyline per season. So the fact that iZombie does get through quite a lot of story, and even if you ignore the procedural crime stuff, it's a very dense show. I came back to season 3 about a year and a half after watching season 2, and honestly, it took me a couple of episodes and about 10 minutes on Wikipedia to fully work out what the hell was going on. There were a lot of characters and a lot of competing moving parts, and they don't necessarily stop to catch you up. There's no previously montage. I assume Netflix just isn't providing them because normally the CW DC comic shows are quite good at giving those, but iZombie just doesn't have them. And if considering as I say, the density of it. If I were them, I'd have one.
Maybe that is just a Netflix thing, because I don't think Netflix does that for really anything.
I think possibly it might be part of Netflix's desire to be a premium telly outputter and be focused on the binge model. Like, why would you have a previously montage on a Netflix show when the odds are you saw the last episode 30 seconds ago?
I think so, because like ever since like I started collecting DVDs and got to the point of, you know, watching whole series of things in long sittings at university when you had lots of free time, there's a few things that became incredibly irritating quite quickly, and those are things that Netflix has realised and got around. One is previously ons, when you've just seen what's previously on, and the other is long opening credits sequences, which Netflix now gives you handily the ability to skip, and a lot of shows have very short opening credits. I mean, I used to watch, when I was at uni, I used to watch quite a lot of Family Guy. I actually really don't like Family Guy now, but that's beside the point. But I used to watch lots of Family Guy at university, and you get so annoyed with the Family Guy opening credit sequence when you're on like your 5th consecutive episode. It just becomes really irritating quite quickly. So I think Netflix have cleverly worked that out and made it easy to get around those problems.
The death of the opening credit sequences, or at least the scaling back of the opening credit sequence, is something that I have mixed feelings about, and possibly I should not now go off on a 20-minute tear about, because we're meant to eventually be talking about Doctor Who. But I do kind of miss them. But on the other hand, only the good ones. But like the Marvel Netflix shows, not to generalise, a lot of the time have quite boring opening credit sequences.
Yeah.
I will admit, Iron Fist, which I've just finished watching, it's alright. It's also been cancelled. That's a terrible opening credit sequence.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of Iron Fist in the last 2 weeks, and I got really sick of that opening credit sequence.
It's like, it looks like virtual reality from the 90s. But on the other hand, you know, I have a lot of time for an arty opening credit sequence that really sets the scene, you know. I am perhaps the last person in the world who does watch the full opening credit sequence for every episode of Orange is the New Black. I like the style, I like that song, it puts me in the headspace for the episode.
Yeah, it's good.
Anyway, yes, I really did go off on that tear anyway. But yes, iZombie, it's a bit sort of light and campy, and it's very, the procedural crime element is still there, but it's a fun show. It pulls out the angst quite nicely when it needs to, and I do enjoy the fact that they're going into this, the zombies are being discovered, what effect will this have on the world stuff, because it is moving it even further away from the procedural stuff, even if it is also forcing them to awkwardly shoehorn the procedural stuff in a strange way. So anyway, yes, I imagine I'll keep watching it, especially because they've announced that it's finishing at the end of season 5, so it's got an ending to go towards. Whether that ending is the zombie apocalypse, I don't know. Anyway, that's me.
We'll find out.
We will find out. I will maybe come back to it in a year or so when I've seen the other 2.5 seasons. Anyway, Alistair, what about you? What have you been doing?
Well, I've been at the London Film Festival this last week, which is on right now as we record. It finishes tomorrow, and then by the time this podcast comes out, I guess it'll have been over for about a while. So I can recommend things that are coming soon that I have seen in the festival. But yeah, it's been a good festival this year. It takes place at quite a few venues across London. I think there's around 250 films in total. This year I'm going to see 8, which is less than I normally go to. Although 8 films in 1 week is still quite a lot. Yeah, but there's been some good stuff at the festival so far. Some notable highlights that listeners may be interested in is I saw the new Coen Brothers film called The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is another Western, but it's got their sort of signature, slightly surreal comedy. I tend to find the Coen Brothers films come in 2 varieties. There's like deadly serious with very dark overtones, such as No Country for Old Men, for example, or there's the kind of quite silly, sort of eccentric comedies like Raising Arizona or Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, or Burn After Reading, or this one, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. It also began life as a Netflix TV show. I think it's produced by Netflix. It's going to be released on Netflix, which is one of the reasons why I'm recommending it to people, because you should be able to see it soon, assuming most of our listeners have at least access to a Netflix account. And it's a sort of anthology Western, so it's sort of got 5 sort of self-contained stories, all Westerns. I saw a police sort of crime movie set in New Orleans called Out of Blue that had some very nice stylistic traits. Yeah, it was one of those things that was kind of fairly straightforward crime film, but was done in a very stylish way, which so I can recommend that. I also saw the new Steve McQueen film, Widows, about a group of widows of armed robbers in America who, after the armed robbers were killed by the police, they have to get together and do a heist in order to pay off a criminal that their husbands all stole from. And yeah, that was another interesting film, quite stylish, directed by Steve McQueen, director of Shame, Hunger, and 12 Years a Slave, so he's a very good director.
Yeah, I saw that with Alistair, and yeah, but it was pretty good. I don't know, I was expecting slightly more from it than it got, but it was pretty fun. It was an enjoyable thriller. It just never really, as we sometimes say, transcended into greatness for me. It felt like it just sat there doing its genre in quite a standard way.
Yeah, I think it's the most accessible Steve McQueen film he's made so far, in that it is very much a genre piece. It's a fairly straightforward heist movie, but it's got some good performances in it, and it's well directed. So another film I saw that was very, very good was a movie called Profiles. This is probably the best thing I've seen at the festival so far, which is a thriller about a journalist who goes undercover in ISIS, or the so-called Islamic State recruitment effort, in that she attempts to get herself recruited online, but undercover as a journalist. What's interesting about this film is it's all done from the point of view of her laptop screen, so you see like her chat conversations, her Skype, her FaceTime, and things like that. So, which sounds really gimmicky, but it actually really works, and it's very, very tense. I mean, a lot of it is like video calls, so there is a lot of video footage in the film, and obviously, so it's not like a film you have to read, like it was all based in text conversations, but it really just has such like a deep tension to it. I really highly recommend seeing Profiles when it comes out. I think maybe the way it's done with this kind of, from the point of view of like sort of internet conversations and Skype things, means that it kind of adds this air of realism. You can completely believe it.
Yeah, there's a film called Searching out with John Cho, which I think is a sort of kidnap thriller, using a very similar sort of storytelling approach, which I saw get a few good reviews recently. Yeah,
there's been a few films like this. I think there's one called Unfriended, which was like a horror movie doing a similar thing. The film also stars everyone's favourite Blade Klingon, Shazad Latif, who plays Ash Tyler in Star Trek Discovery, and Clem Fandango in Toast of London. Really showing off his range between playing a Islamic State recruiter, a Klingon who's been turned into a person, and the slightly stupid owner of a recording studio. So yeah, he's got range, I'll give him that.
Yeah, no, he was good in Star Trek, and to be fair, that film does sound interesting.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. I'm not sure when it's coming out. It seems to be one of the sort of... There's a lot of independent films at the festival, and some of them you just never see again. One of the things I feel bad over the years is that sometimes I see a film at the festival and I tell all my friends, like, oh, it's brilliant, and it never comes out and no one ever gets the chance to see it. A few years ago, there was a movie called The Keeping Room.
Yeah.
Which stars Sam Worthington of Avatar and Terminator Salvation fame. So it was a relatively high-profile film, and it was really, really good, set in the American Civil War. And yeah, it never seemed to get released, and I told everyone to go see it, and no one ever did, because I never saw it even on a selective release in the UK. So I always feel bad dropping festival recommendations, because I do see a lot of foreign language films or documentaries or obscure indie films that they're seeking distribution through film festivals, but not every film will get noticed and picked up. But if you do get a chance to see Profiles, maybe it'll end up on Netflix as well. I recommend it. But certainly some high profile stuff that will get released that's very good includes Steve McQueen's Widows and Coen Brothers' Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
Okay, and our main thing this fortnight, of course, we will be talking about the start of the new series of Doctor Who. This is the first series, as I think Alistair said at the start, with Jodie Whittaker as the first female Doctor and Chris Chibnall as the new showrunner, with 3 new sidekicks played by Bradley Walsh, Tosin Cole and Mandip Gill. So yep, we've seen the first 2 episodes of this, which does bring us to a slightly annoying thing with our podcast scheduling. Unfortunately, we have to record these over the weekend in order to get them out for you in time, because we have, jobs. And, of course, Doctor Who now airs last thing on the weekend on a Sunday night, therefore meaning that we have seen the first 2 episodes of the new series, and you have seen the first 3. So possibly, maybe, some of our conclusions in this segment would have been blown out of the water by episode 3. We will have to wait and see. We both quite like Doctor Who, so it's very possible we will get back to you once we have seen literally the entire series. Then we'll all be on the same page and we can respect our opinions for what they are, rather than worrying about who's seen what. But anyway, all that having been said, and with the understanding that we may spoil the first 2 episodes of Doctor Who Series 11, Alistair, what did you think?
Yeah, I'm liking it so far. The first 2 episodes were good. What I liked about the new one, especially the first episode, is that they've gone for quite a few differences to previous series. So rather than just changing, the person who plays the Doctor, and obviously this is a landmark series and that's the first woman to play the Doctor, they've changed it up in several ways as well, rather than making that one, obviously, very significant change. So the new series seems to revolve around Sheffield as a location rather than London. as previous series have. The first episode is sort of set in Sheffield, and I can imagine Sheffield is a location they'll be returning to throughout the series. And also they're having 3 companions this time rather than just the one, which is again certainly varying the format based on pretty much the way Doctor Who's been set up since it came back in 2005. And, you know, they've introduced a new showrunner as well, so there's more changes there. So the whole thing feels quite different to Doctor Who before, which is good because it really feels like it's kind of been given a refresh and a new lease of life. It feels like a new show, which is kind of the point, I guess, in Doctor Who, as they change showrunners and leads so much that it kind of should feel like a new show each time.
Yeah, I agree with that, but in true Nick Bryan style, wouldn't go quite so far with the blanket positivity. But I do like the general tone. I do think that it's, as you say, a viable step away from the Moffat-Davis stuff in a way that is good. I think the actors and characters are tangibly good. I think the writing is a bit clunky at times in a way that I don't just think interesting new style. I think this kind of isn't great. This came for a lot more for me in the second episode. Like, the first episode, I must admit, did carry me along a lot. I mean, I went into this with a vague sense of, okay, I like Jodie Whittaker as an actress. I'm here for the notion of the first female Doctor. I'm a bit concerned with Chris Chibnall as showrunner because I have felt that a lot of his previous Doctor Who stuff and his other work on Torchwood and the bits of Broadchurch that I've seen basically ranged from okay at the top and kind of terrible at the bottom. And there's nothing here that's kind of terrible. I mean, I think this is obviously a big, I suspect possibly lifetime dream gig for him, but I don't think he's going to let himself turn out something that isn't at least okay. But I thought the second episode was very much just okay, outside of some of the fun acting-y touches. But, you know, before I get too far into the poo-pooing, the general tone, as you say, the general sense that something has definitely changed since the Moffat-Davis era, I liked it. I think there's something enjoyably sort of grounded and BBC drama-y, and although I think there's a risk of that drifting into, like, slightly generic, I think there's something, especially considering the spacey out-there-ness of some of the Moffat stuff, I think the more realistic, grounded, let's actually talk about these people's lives and motivations and give them more complicated backgrounds than just generic middle-class family, and, you know, make them seem like more than just an archetype of a companion for the Doctor to chat to. Make them people rather than big mythic roles, which, again, Moffat especially was quite prone to, is something that is both, I think, needed to appeal to a wider audience and also does a good job of letting the Chibnall era distinguish itself from the previous eras. Jodie Whittaker is definitely putting out a very Doctor-y performance. It's quite hard to say after 2 episodes. I get the feeling she's going for quite a broad, friendly, heroic David Tennant type thing with the usual slight undercurrent of I could be dangerous if you annoyed me, but mostly I'm quite friendly, which is obviously the widest appeal, crowd-pleasing version. That's when Doctor Who has been most popular of late, when the Doctor is all, you know, fairly clean, good looks and relatively straightforward compassion. And I did assume that if and when they did deviate from the Doctor being a white man, the version they went for would probably be young, good-looking, compassionate, appealing, in order to avoid baiting more controversy than they absolutely had to.
Yeah, I think you're right with that. That does seem like sort of the template for the Jodie Whittaker Doctor Who. The whole thing reminds me a lot of the kind of Peter Davison Doctor Who in tone. That might be because Jodie Whittaker's got 3 companions, and yeah, at the beginning of the Peter Davison years he had 3 companions, so but also yeah, he did have that kind of broad, charming appeal with the kind of the slight edge of menace that, as you say, David Tennant and Jodie Whittaker has. I mean, it's only been 2 episodes, but she hasn't done any of the bits that require the Doctor to be quite dark. It'd be interesting to see how well she is at doing sort of dark bits, you know, the kind of, usually summed up, we're going to, you stupid humans, you know, what have you done? Bit that every kind of Doctor Who has at one point or another. It'd be interesting to see how she approaches that. David Tennant, I thought he did it, but he couldn't do it as well as even Matt Smith, who was younger. I thought Matt Smith actually was better at doing the darkness. And obviously, Capaldi and Eccleston were very good at that because being sort of theatrically trained actors. I mean, David Tennant's done lots of theatre, I know as well, actually, to be fair to him. I just felt the kind of the older actors with a bit more gravitas were better at the darker bits. So it remains to be seen how Jodie Whittaker handles those, but, you know, as she might be very good at it. We just got to wait and see. There's only been 2 episodes. Also, what you said about the dialogue, yeah, I agree with you that there has been some sort of clunky dialogue, although no more than kind of your sort of baseline Doctor Who episode. I mean, Doctor Who, generally, there's always like some kind of clunky exposition or a character that speaks quite on the nose. And I mean, it's present, but it's no more present, I think, than a lot of Doctor Who. I mean, certainly some of the ones that Chris Chibnall has written. I think there was the Silurian double-parter with Matt Smith.
Yeah.
So something like The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. I remember that had some horrendously on-the-nose dialogue, so it's better than that.
I don't know. I I feel that there's quite a lot of, even by Doctor Who standards, quite a lot of everyone just saying very much what's on screen in a way that's quite... I don't know. I don't quite know if the previous seasons, written and overseen by other writers, did this less, or if they just disguised it better. Like, I get the feeling that there's a lot of exposition-y bits in some of the Chibnall scripts in these 2 episodes that Moffat or Davis might have concealed better beneath a dramatic monologue or a few jokes, whereas just flatly stating them in dialogue where people explain things to each other gets a bit... I don't know. I felt it was a bit much. I felt there was some parts of this where you could have just closed your eyes or looked away from the screen and probably still followed the plot okay, because every time anything which was even vaguely plot relevant happened, someone would say, "Oh look, he's got a cigar. I wonder what it does. Oh look, we're in a room and there's a carving on the floor. What does it say? Well, it says jab, 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 jab," whatever that means. Anyway, it just at times felt a bit much like that, and in a way that I think previous writers either didn't do or were better at disguising in sort of more natural or entertaining dialogue, so I didn't sit there going, "Jesus Christ, stop stating things, please."
Yeah, no, sorry.
I'm done now. You can state something.
I agree with that. There is some sort of exposition-heavy dialogue. The first episode, I think, was, again, I think you just said was better for not having that, in that it was quite tense at its core, in that it was kind of based around chase. There was a alien villain that was hunting a character through Sheffield, and the ending was, again, quite a tense action scene involving cranes in a construction yard. There was some real tension there, and I thought, that worked very well. And obviously after they got through the slightly clunky sort of exposition-y bits, they were able to kind of just really go with the tension, partly because that episode was set in Sheffield, present day, with just an evil alien bounty hunter thing turns up. It requires a lot less exposition than the second episode, which is on like an alien planet where there's more world building to do. But I did, like the first episode, again, had like a really good sort of action-based climax. As a lot of people have pointed out, on Twitter and things like that was good, but obviously they clearly threw money at the first episode so that it wasn't a disappointment. And although Doctor Who is clearly one of the BBC's like flagship shows in terms of budget, it will be interesting to see how, as the series goes on, how it fares with the less financially endowed episodes. But at least they used that money in the first episode to make a good sequence.
Yeah, the first episode, there were still a few bits of dialogue where I was a bit sort of, did you really need to just tell me? But the plot moved along quite well, I thought. It was very full of things to do. Obviously, the upside of introducing a new Doctor and not one but 3 different companions, and have an actual episodic plot to give them something to do, is you're not really going to lack for sort of busy work, I guess. There wasn't that much space for people to just stand around explaining stuff to each other, because there was quite a lot of running around to be doing. One of the big problems with the second episode, maybe, is that it felt like a lot of the energy just sort of dropped away. I don't know, I came away from it thinking, so that was a whole episode where they literally plodded from one end of a desert to another, from the same tent to the same tent again. The tension didn't exactly rise and fall. I think there was a showdown with some sheet monster things, which I think was meant to be a bit more of an exciting action climax than it kind of came across as.
Yeah, I remember that was supposed to be a big action sequence. That was one I think that maybe would have been better if like a little bit more money had been spent on the villains, because they were just kind of wavy lines.
I'm willing to give them the wavy lines, but I didn't really feel like they rose the tension particularly well and choreographed it to seem that dramatic. There was a weird bit where the Doctor already knew that her TARDIS was blinking in and out of existence. Like, she said it at the beginning of the episode. Then they got to the place where the TARDIS was meant to be, and she was like, "It's not there. Oh God, we're screwed." Or it might wink back into existence in a minute, like you said it would. Oh look, it has. Are you stupid?
That was quite an empty, dramatic beat. It does kind of like annoy me in films and TV when someone sets up like a moment of tension, then diffuses it a second later, completely pointlessly. Probably the worst example is in Iron Man 2. Tony Stark discovers the element that he needs to save his life. And then Jarvis is like, this element is impossible to create. And then Iron Man goes out and tries to create it, and then he does so straight away. It was like, was that...
Exactly.
Was that necessary? It's just like you just set up a bit of tension, then diffused it instantly. It would have just been better if... I don't know, it's tonally odd. And that bit with the TARDIS was also like that.
I mean, if they wanted the "oh God, it's gone forever, we're screwed" moments, then just don't include the bit earlier where they've established it blinking in and out of existence, because it just makes them look like they've got selective amnesia. I mean, it's a sort of thing that you might have gotten away with it if the Doctor hadn't been there and it had been just the poor stupid humans having a panic attack. But the Doctor's meant to be, clever enough to remember the things that she said 40 minutes previously.
Yeah.
And you can sort of get away with making the companions look a bit thick in moments of panic or crisis, but it seemed to be an out of character for the Doctor.
I did like how they saved the reveal of the TARDIS to the second episode, because sometimes I do feel when, especially episodes that introduce new companions, they have to cram in a lot, like introducing the Doctor, that they're an alien, aliens exist and are on Earth. There's a TARDIS which is bigger on the inside. Sometimes it feels a bit rushed. I think the very first episode of Doctor Who, called Rose, actually handled the whole thing quite well, especially the bit when Rose first sees the TARDIS, she just freaks out and completely runs away. There's later ones I felt that's kind of, as they went along introducing companions, the companions kind of adapt to their new unreality quite quickly. I mean, I think because Doctor Who in some ways is very much like an urban fantasy, or like urban science fiction, but they kind of it's quite light on the science at times. So a lot of urban fantasy is like a beat that's really hard to get right in urban fantasy, is the moment when a character who has a very normal existence, suddenly their normality is shattered and they discover that aliens or vampires or zombies or whatever are real. And basically you have to get through the shock to they're okay with this so the plot can proceed. And a lot of shows, books, films, any medium mishandle this beat, and the characters adapt way too easily to their whole world being shattered, which is just unrealistic. And I think Doctor Who has handled it to better and worse degrees. Like, the very first episode is very good. I was trying to think, like, is the introduction of Clara, I thought they kind of mishandled that, in that she's basically kind of cool with the whole thing pretty quickly. And in this new series, by staggering the reveals, it actually gave people time to adapt. And also by the fact that they basically do a standalone adventure, and it's supposed to be over for these characters, but then through a mistake the Doctor makes, they get catapulted into the second adventure, and then save the TARDIS reveal to the end. And also of the second episode, and then by forcing the characters to have to go through the TARDIS, meant they kind of staggered this period of adjustment, which I think worked better than it has done in the past.
Again, it goes towards the interesting new take, and, spreading out finding the TARDIS into the second episode is a nice way of making Doctor Who work in the post-serialisation world that I was sort of discussing whilst talking about iZombie, without introducing massive, complicated arc plots. I mean, there was a gentle hint of that when they talked to the Sheets monsters, and they mentioned some plot keywords, which sort of suggests we're headed back to the Russell T Davies era of subplots, where it's more people mention a few keywords and you find out what it is at the end, rather than an actual plot being slowly unpacked over the course of an episode. But I'm curious to see how they actually play that. Yeah,
I like a good, first episode of a new series. I think this is one of the points I made when we discussed some of those new comics that launched, like the Immortal Hulk and the new Superman this year. Like a good first episode, it threw out a lot of stuff, and it's all there's lots of stuff in the air, and its quality of the series were based on how well the show is able to catch all these kind of plot balloons it's sort of thrown out. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff out there. Like I say, it depends how it goes.
Yeah, and also they've set up some interesting stuff in terms of the actual characters and giving them things to deal with, and, as I said earlier, sort of actual human backgrounds rather than vague mysteries or nothing at all, which I can appreciate. The Ryan and Graham characters have perhaps been given a bit more meaty material so far. I'm sort of hoping that there's more development in terms of the Yaz character coming soon, because she is the one who hasn't really had a huge amount to do. She's got a backstory as a trainee police officer who wants a bit more from her life, but it also, people who made gentle jokes about Clara having no backstory between being brave and having a job, it does kind of feel like Yaz is another companion who is brave and has a job.
Yeah, I can imagine throughout the first series we're going to get at least one episode that will focus in detail on the backstory of each character, so that everyone's going to get their moment in the spotlight, I assume, when they get to their character development and a bit of serious acting. I mean, they've done that very well. I think, again, one of the best examples is the episode in the first series of Doctor Who called Father's Day, when they really focus in on Rose and her life. So maybe I can imagine each companion will get their own Father's Day-esque episode.
Yeah, if they're passing it out in quite a modular way, like they sort of seem to be, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where they end up going with it over the course of the 10 episodes we're getting, which is of course less than we've got over the last few series, which, I don't know, I'm sure some people have, not unreasonably taken as, oh dear, are they losing faith in it? But then again, it does look very shiny, possibly gently stepping towards our second half question, but this is the closest I've yet seen to Doctor Who competing with the big shiny US sci-fi shows. It does look amazing, and although, as you said earlier, I'm sure they're throwing a lot of the money towards the opening episodes to try and get people on board, and I'd be curious to see, once we get into the sort of mid to late mid-section, things start to look a bit more like gently cheap, like they did in some of the mid-section episodes in previous seasons. But as a start, there's something very nice and luscious and textured about it, which, almost against my better critical instincts, does make me slightly more inclined to let it off some of the things I might be inclined to complain about in the plotting or dialogue, because it is just very nice to look at.
Yeah, certainly they have done a good job making it look good. I liked the second episode. I thought they did a good job of doing what is a fairly high concept science fiction story on a BBC budget. It did look as good as, an episode of Black Mirror or, those Electric Dreams, that Philip K. Dick anthology show. The BBC, I think, certainly has less money than Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, for all that, I made a joke earlier about the slight anticlimacticness of the beginning and ending the episode in the same tent. I'm sure it probably cost less to do the tent than it would have done to end the episode in a gigantic towering alien palace, so...
Yeah. And they had Art Malik, and he's a good actor.
Yes, he did a lot for it. I was actually quite disappointed that his role ended up being so small, considering they bothered to put him in that quite weird trailer they did at the end of the first episode, where instead of teasing any plot whatsoever, they teased all the sort of TV actors they've got for it, a lot of which I have not heard of.
Yeah, there was also quite a lot of people I had heard of who I thought were quite good gets, like Art Malik being a good example.
Art Malik's a good get. They got, is it Chris Noth from Sex and the City? I think there were at least a couple of others I sort of recognised. I did keep thinking, okay, if you're going to bother to tease the actors like this, I was sort of assuming there would be, it would end on, here's our big, impressive get from Hollywood, but they never quite got there.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know, it was just a bit strange. I could see them teasing sort of a general montage. I was just quite surprised it ended up being quite so focused on, here are the names of the actors.
Yeah, I guess they really wanted to hook people in, so they came back, and I guess they thought, well, the selling point is they've got quite a lot of good guest stars this year. Yeah,
it's interesting, I guess, if only because it's slightly added to the feeling that, perhaps reasonably, a lot of what they're focused on with this launch might be getting in people who aren't me. I mean, the stuff I liked about a lot of the Davis Moffat stuff was the fact that it was written in a style which I would describe as trying quite hard to be funny and clever. I think Davis tried harder to be funny and Moffat tried harder to be clever, but they were both trying to be funny and clever.
Yeah. Well, they're both former sitcom writers, aren't they? Writers and showrunners.
They're both known for sort of comedy dramas, yeah. Moffat, again, leaning slightly towards the comedy. Yeah, and this episode I didn't think was trying quite as desperately hard to be funny and clever, which is one of the reasons why, as we've said, it felt like a departure.
Yeah.
And although that might maybe make it slightly less specifically geared towards me, I'm excited to find out about myself psychologically. Do I actually like Doctor Who, or do I just happen to like writers who try quite hard to be funny and clever, and they've just had two of those in a row?
Yeah.
If now that they brought in a guy who writes a slightly more kitchen sink BBC style, am I going to find myself thinking, it's fine, I suppose?
I mean, kitchen sink, for a given value of kitchen sink, that is a Doctor Who. The Doctor Who kitchen sink drama is going to be still going to be probably quite entertaining.
Well, yeah, and it's not that there weren't jokes in it. It's just that it didn't feel like a mental quota in the writer's mind thinking, right, if there's not at least one or two jokes in this conversation, I have failed.
Yeah.
Which you did get the feeling that, unless it was a heavy emotional conversation, both Moffat and Davis did go into most scenes thinking. Yeah,
there was definitely an element of that. I mean, it depends how it evolves over time, but I think Chris Chibnall isn't as well known for his comedy writing in that the stuff he's done before, he's done a lot of dramas, like Torchwood, which was the slightly more serious Doctor Who, at least it was supposed to be, and Broadchurch. He's known more for the other thing that British TV does very well, which is detective crime dramas.
There were not many lulls in Broadchurch, the sad seaside town dead kid drama, it's true.
No.
Nor was I thought Broadchurch that amazing, but anyway, that's another conversation. Yeah, it's interesting, if only because, as I say, it does create this tangible feeling that it's a different show. As I say, a slightly more down-to-earth tone of writing, a sort of focus at look at all the guest stars rather than look at the crazy plot twists that are coming up. Yeah, it's interesting because it feels like a slightly different kind of show, and although it's a kind of show that may not appeal as much to me personally, I think making that show for the last 10 years at a variety of tones, I think was kind of running out of steam to some degree, so I can see why they might go a bit more for this in the hope that they can, on the back of the rush of publicity they've had for the first female Doctor, maybe put in some more viewers outside of the Nick Bryan demographic, the people who like geeky things and people who like funny, clever, or if you wanted to be less kind, slightly smug script writing.
I think for the show that's been running for quite a long time with a sort of a similar kind of look and feel, over time it becomes more and more concentrated on the core fans as the kind of casual viewer drops away. That's definitely something I've noticed amongst my friends who aren't into Doctor Who as I am, is that the amount that Doctor Who's become a talking point amongst my broader friendship group and the amount of people I know who's watching it has just declined over the years. So I think this is a good opportunity to refresh Doctor Who and, like you say, reach maybe back for a broader audience, because now, new showrunner, new Doctor, slightly different tone, new setting and new companions. It's all set up to kind of renew and expand the fan base, which is good. Bringing on a new generation of fans, and it's what keeps Doctor Who alive, and it's what's kept Doctor Who going since the 1960s. Is this fact that it can keep renewing itself and keep remaking itself for a new age and keep reaching out to new fans.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, trying to make it clear that this is, me more sort of sitting back and observing rather than throwing a tantrum. If not being as heavily aimed at me is what the show needs to keep continuing, then it's hard for me to blame them for doing it. It's not as if I suffer from a lack of content in the world. I mean, I'll probably keep watching Doctor Who anyway as a vague zeitgeist check, but I'm prepared for it to slip slightly down the list of things I like if necessary. They've got to do them.
Yeah, this strikes me as like a new, more modern Doctor Who. Even under the later Moffat series, it still felt very much like a mid-2000s TV show. But I felt they've kind of renewed it in the sense of that it felt like it was maybe getting a bit old, and this now feels like a modern show.
Yeah, I just find myself thinking about Stranger Things a bit during the first episode. I don't know if that's an accurate comparison or not, but the sort of some of the ground level wondrous shininess of it, sort of people looking up at weird shapes. I don't know. I did sometimes think, okay, is it valid to say this is the post-Stranger Things Doctor Who? I don't know. Maybe that specific comparison is wrong, but it definitely, as you say, felt like they'd dragged it a bit more towards what I'd describe as 2018 telly. Okay, and on to our supplementary question. One of the things that really strikes you about the new series of Doctor Who, apart, of course, from the Doctor's newfound womanhood, is quite how strikingly high-end it looks. Like, money has been spent on this. And as I, again, hinted in my earlier bit, it does make it harder to get too uppity about some of the more on-the-nose dialogue when it does look just so lovely. So how much do production values really matter? Should we care about them in our critical decision-making? Is it worth spending thousands of pounds on, or hundreds of thousands of millions of pounds, on making nice CGI graphics if the writing isn't good? What does it all mean? Alistair, tell us.
Well, I think we certainly should care about production values, because cinema and television is a visual medium, and part of the art is the visual appeal. I always think that people really undervalue the amount of time and effort and skill, craftsmanship and artistic talent that goes into making everything from set designs to, CGI effects and, makeup and things like that. Like, there's as much sort of love and talent goes into a good CGI effect as goes into a great bit of writing or acting, but I don't know, it seems a bit gauche to be like, oh, I love that CGI effect, and people prefer to say, too much CGI, where's the good writing, the good acting? It's like, it's all art, and it's a visual experience. If you want good writing and good acting and really dislike effects, the theatre is available, as is the radio. So I think it is important. I do think that there's a balance that's needed between good writing and good production design, and good production design can cover for some bad writing, and good writing can cover for, shall we say, cheap production design. But if one side isn't working, the other side will have to work a lot harder, if you see what I mean. So one of the good things about this most recent Doctor Who is, the writing has been a bit clunky at times, but it's been very slickly executed, especially I think the first episode, which is why I've enjoyed it so much. So, but the fact that the production design is working overtime covers up for, as you say, the slightly clunky writing. But there's also a special case here with Doctor Who, that Doctor Who is such a concept-driven show. Each episode bases around, a different setting, different supporting characters, different, concept, that there really has to be good writing. Whereas, something like Battlestar Galactica, you could have one episode that was kind of like a big battle. And obviously, Battlestar Galactica did have a lot of good writing, but you could get away with, okay, this episode's just big battle, and it was nice to look at, and then we'll have some nuanced writing and character drama in the next one. But with Doctor Who, there does have to be a strong concept for each episode, so it's harder to get away with production values.
Well, yeah, I mean, the less jokey tone I mentioned earlier, it does still complement it, because I think it's easier to perhaps pull a quite serious tone off if you're not looking at the effects and going, yeah, okay. really, no. You know, it's one of the reasons why perhaps some of the Moffat era's jabs towards soaring, high-end, slightly pretentious seriousness felt a bit much sometimes, because the visuals weren't always up to what he was trying to have the Doctor give massive speeches about. Davis sometimes had a slightly better sense of what he should just leave to the imagination, rather than trying to make people CGI. But, yeah, I mean, I've heard people say that one of the reasons Doctor Who came back in 2005 was because computer effects finally got affordable enough that the BBC could make a version which wouldn't look too cartoonishly bad compared to things like Star Trek from the US. I mean, even as people have pointed out to me when I've made this remark in conversations, arguably they only just managed it. There's some ropey effect moments in like the first couple of seasons of New Who. But still, I think if they were going to make the show and take it seriously as an endeavour and actually have, you know, the attempt to get proper audience buy-in, I think having it actually look good, or at least okay enough that you could let your imagination fill in the blanks, was probably quite important.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right about that. I remember watching a documentary about the Terminator TV show, Sarah Connor Chronicles, and they were saying that it goes to show how much cheaper computer special effects has become, that they can now afford to do the T-1000 on a TV budget. When it was the T-1000 first appeared in Terminator 2, it cost an enormous sum of like Hollywood action blockbuster money, which is a different order of finance. But now they can afford to do it on television. You know, if American TV shows can afford to do really, really sophisticated CGI effects, then BBC can afford to do Doctor Who. But then again, Doctor Who's always kind of been about ropey special effects. I mean, that's kind of part of the charm. And I think Doctor Who can get away with like maybe things looking a bit rubbery or sets looking a bit cheap, because it is kind of like the homespun charm of Doctor Who. Whereas if you were going to launch a brand new sci-fi show without so much history, you might struggle a bit more.
Yeah, I think it can get away with a certain amount of that. I mean, as I say, I think a lot of the sort of knowing, jokey tone that they adopted through the first 10 series was partly to acknowledge that there was obviously a lot of corner cutting, or a lot of, you know, why is the big magic thing that controls all reality also happen to resemble a battery or a USB stick? I mean, the answer is obviously because we didn't want to have to CGI the magic swirling whirligig of Zan into every fucking scene. But, yeah, you know, the Doctor just makes a joke about, oh, of course it's a battery. What else would it be? And then he says something funnier than that I just improved. And you just go with it. And you know the real reason is money, money, money. And if this was a high-end feature film, they probably would have put the swirling orb into every scene. But they haven't, and we know why, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's the thing. And the writing works well to, you know, like say, yeah, puts it down with a joke, or, you know, still steps around these things. But I guess it's part of the thing that if you're going to have low production values, you need good writing. You know, if you're going to have bad writing, it better be good to look at. One thing that I remember from my time when I used to make independent short films, and you meet lots of other people making films, and obviously we had no money. We maybe had like a bit we could save, and, you know, we could rent some equipment and things like that, but we certainly had absolutely nothing. So people will try to come up with like clever ideas, and obviously a lot of people wrote, you know, short comedies set in pubs because, well, my friend will let me film in his pub, and things like that. But then there was a lot of temptation to, for example, to write like, say, thrillers that all take place within one room. And I can see why, because that is cheap to make. But when you sit down to write a thriller that will only take place in one room, it has to be really, really good, or else people will get bored. And I've sat through a lot of people explaining to me, and also watching these one-room thrillers, and some of them are a bit dire. I mean, for every great film, you know, like the original Saw, which mainly takes place in one room, and it is pretty good, or there's a film called Buried, I think, which just takes place entirely in a coffin, where a guy's been...
The Ryan Reynolds thing,
yeah. He's been buried alive. And there's one starring Tom Hardy. It all takes place in his car as he's driving. And I can't fly... Lock, that's it, yeah, I knew it was a one-word title. I mean, for every film like that that's really good and really works well, but like, it's worth pointing out that those films had like Ryan Reynolds, Tom Hardy. The original Saw had Tolan Bell and Danny Glover, I think, in it. You know, those actually quite big names. There's a British one called Exam that's quite good. But for every one of those, there's a lot of films that basically have done quite a good job of coming up with a concept that doesn't require much money, but ultimately just not very good, because it's really hard to sustain tension and interest of an audience if you're just going to have one character, unless you're a brilliant writer.
Well, yeah, we have complained in the past at great length, and therefore I'll try and keep this short, about the amount of, you know, endless conversations in rooms restating the plot and themes that the Marvel Netflix shows seem to need to have in order to desperately scrabble up to their full 13-episode order. Seemingly, no matter how many times I say, just cut the order, you morons, they just won't hear me.
Yeah, apart from for Iron Fist.
Apart from for Iron Fist, which they then cancelled. So cheers, guys. You give up with one hand and then punch me with the other.
Yeah, it's difficult. And with Doctor Who, there's usually one episode that will be based more like on Earth, clearly in like a quarry or a building site because you get to the point that, okay, this is the cheap one. Doctor Who also, I guess, has the issue that because they move around so much, they can't just, other than the TARDIS, which obviously they throw money at to make it look good, they can't just, okay, we'll build like 4 amazing sets and we'll basically go through that. Like Star Trek, one of the reasons why Star Trek looks quite good is they spend a lot of money making the Enterprise look good, and where quite a lot of the drama takes place, but you can build that set and it's good for 22 episodes.
Yeah.
Whereas Doctor Who doesn't really have that, other than, like I say, the TARDIS, which they do make the TARDIS look good, but because they're constantly moving through time and space. And obviously they also do historical episodes, and obviously even if you're going to have a drama in one building, if it's set in the past, that you just multiply in costs in terms of props and dressings and costumes and things. So Doctor Who, I think it doesn't make its life easy for itself the way it's written.
Famous, the under-budget show has highest budget possible premise is...
Yeah.
Possibly very much part of the joke, and again, one of the reasons why we're willing to tolerate a certain level of quite low budget. And again, I'll be curious to see how impressive the budget of this current series still looks by the time we get to the midway episodes. Yeah, as you say, it's a shame because on the one hand, if you're clearly making something aimed at a lower budget, then if the writing's not good, then no one will respect your cost cutting. At the same time, if the writing's not good and you've spent millions upon millions on it, you'll often end up getting kind of dismissed as well. I mean, I'm pretty sure quite a lot of quite talented people will work for quite a long time to make those impossibly involved, weird, squiggly robot things in the Transformers films, and everyone just makes fun of them.
Because of the bad writing, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that they've probably got the sort of sensible, adult, pragmatic approach to their art, but they just treat it as a job and come away thinking, well, we did a good job at our end, it's not our fault that the script was created by someone bashing their head repeatedly against the keyboard and then just sort of nodding at it. But it's a shame because it does contribute to the notion that production values arguably kind of don't matter. Well, no, that's rude, but yeah, I guess similar to how it sometimes is in comics, they become kind of an invisible section. Like, you don't notice them unless they're done badly, to an extent.
Yeah, that's what people say about editing or direction or music a lot of the time. You only notice it when it doesn't work, and being good is about being invisible. And I do feel sorry for a lot of people who you do like both like special effects, practical effects, set dressing, production design. Their work really is not as valued as the quote-unquote, doing air quotes for an audio medium.
Cool.
Sort of the arty professions, like writing, acting, directing. There's there's a lot of artistry goes into a Transformers movie, but people don't really care because they're bad, because they're badly written and badly acted and badly directed. And I stand by those criticisms of the Transformers film.
Fair enough.
But I do feel sorry for the people who put a lot of effort into making the special effects look good. And they really can't win either way, because then when they're on a film like Arrival, say, or Blade Runner 2049, when they clearly also had an enormous special effects budget, at least the size of a Transformers film or even more. But rather than having like just a big CGI thing smashing into each other, they made like beautiful urban landscapes and dams and this apocalyptic thing. And it's a beautiful artwork that's serving the storytelling, and still people are like, oh, it's a great story, great acting. You can't win either way. They either get ignored or ignored when it's good, ignored when it's bad. Production values are important, but I guess what we're getting down to is that like it is kind of writing and acting as well that matters, and that's kind of what people are here for. So if the production values remain high for this series of Doctor Who, but the writing kind of tails off, then we will remember it as like a disappointing series of Doctor Who.
Yeah, which is, again, possibly unfair to the people who work hard on these things, but, that's the nature of the crushing pyramid of it all, to be honest. Unfortunately, they can only work visually on the things that the writer tells them to make. I mean, I guess we're maybe slightly conflating something like production values and something like directing. Like, how the show actually looks and whether it's shiny, as opposed to what the angles are and how it's actually the story's actually been chosen to be told. I mean, I like to talk about comics, but in comics those two things are kind of conflated, because the artist kind of both calls the shots, unless the writer has very specifically said, do it like this, please, and then has to actually enact how it looks. But yeah, there's a whole mess of people whose lives could probably be folded into whether the writer fucks up or not. Or, I mean, I'm trying to think of films where I've genuinely have gone in, and my thoughts on the two issues have separated to the extent that I would say, well, that was an amazingly directed film. I really, really respect what I did with the visuals, even though the plot was gibberish, rather than just flattening the whole thing down into one long negative farting noise.
There's definitely have been films where I think like that was beautiful to look at, but maybe the plot and things weren't as good. It's slightly different, but things like Studio Ghibli films that are like they've got really beautiful animation. But obviously,
yeah.
a lot of them have great plot and character and writing as well, so it's not really a fair comparison. I'm trying to think, there was definitely been films where I thought like I really enjoyed looking at that, but wasn't so taken with like the plot or things like that. But also what you said in terms of hierarchy, there is the hierarchy of art, sort of like what's considered valuable art or what the kind of the emphasis is on is more than just there's a difference between like, you know, writers and special effects people, in that, like, you know, the star is the most important part of the TV show. And so, for example, even if the writing is very good and the directing is good for this series of Doctor Who, but if for whatever reason Jodie Whittaker turns in a bad performance as the Doctor, or it just doesn't work, we'll remember it as a bad series. You know, even if there's some great writing and some cleverly plotted episodes, it kind of all rests on primarily the star playing the Doctor, and also, I guess, the main showrunner. I mean, for the record, I think it's unlikely Jodie Whittaker will turn in a bad performance. She's been good in the first 2 episodes and is talented and is very good at other things I've seen her in. But it does kind of very much rest on her, and there's only so much that episode writing can do to make this a success. So there is still, like, you know, a hierarchy. And also it does rest on Chris Chibnall and the decisions he makes, that, you know, if he makes some bad overall decisions for the tone or direction of characters, tone of the show, direction of characters, arc plot, or the events of the major episodes, like the first and last one, for example, it doesn't matter. It won't matter if, you know, there's some good writing in the middle, or a clever episode 7 won't save, you know, an overall bad piece of show running. You know, production values do matter. Maybe not as much as writing, but clearly, like, some artistic jobs in this show that are the most important ones, and that's what it hinges on.
Yeah, certainly in the sort of critical consensus we're talking about. Like, I'm sure a lot of people do watch the Transformers movies and, you know, respect the art, but that doesn't make you come away thinking that's a good movie. It just makes you come away thinking that was a bad movie with some good art in it. I mean, even though I'm not sure I love Chris Chibnall as a scriptwriter, my vague hope is that he might prove to be a good overall showrunner, if only because I quite like what he's trying to do in terms of tone and how he's trying to differentiate himself from the old stuff, and I think he's got some interesting ideas. So I'm hoping that he will do a decent job of shepherding other writers and executing that, even if I do have to slightly hold in my sighs during the episodes he actually scripts. And obviously, like it or not, as you say, those episodes tend to be the ones that are viewed as setting the direction. But if it helps me get some entertainment out of it in that way, I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I drifted off the question and out into space there. Never mind.
That's all we have time for this episode. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. If you want more Moderate Fantasy Violence, then you can visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find back episodes of the podcast, short audio clips, and bonus pieces written by Nick and myself.
Yep, and if you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook or Twitter, I think, by searching Moderate Fantasy Violence and looking for the purple logo that we ripped off from the BBFC, where you will find show-related updates and occasionally us talking about pop cultural things, either directly or retweeted from our own accounts. And speaking of my own account, you can follow me on Twitter as @NickMB. You can also go to my website at nickbryan.com for details of the books I write and, of course, also the comics I publish, such as the aforementioned The Little Deaths of Watson Tower, out now about a group of kids who turn into tiny Grim Reapers, and, as I basically said earlier, beautifully drawn by Rosie Alexander. And if nothing else, please do go and look at the cover if you haven't already seen it being splashed across social media by me. It's a lovely, lovely bit of pink visible art, and I've got the physical copies in a large box next to me, and they are gorgeous objects. I would, if you've got room in your life for a 20-page comic, I would fully endorse buying one. Available now on my website, and if you don't have room in your life or flat for a 20-page comic, it is also available as a PDF, so you can read it on your screen or iPad or however you like to read things. But yes, I am very, very happy with how that came out, so I implore you to at least give it a go. I might self-indulgently put a link and maybe even a picture of the cover if I'm really organised in the show notes on the website for this episode. Thank you.
I've seen the art and read Nick's comic, and I can say it's good, and I would recommend everyone going out and getting it. I've got my copy pre-ordered, so I'm looking forward to seeing the physical thing. And if perchance you want anything more from me, you can visit my website, which is redtrainblog.com, or you can follow me on Twitter, where I am at Alistair J.R. Ball. Join us next time when we will be reviewing the new series of Marvel and Netflix superhero show, Daredevil. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
some more audio from this episode, where Alistair found out about Luke Cage being cancelled, but put it out as an excessive fantasy violence instead. Go to the website to check it out. P.S. The Third Doctor, who episode was okay.